Good afternoon, and welcome to the first meeting of the State Senate Committee on Government Operations. I'm Sharon Moriwaki, Chair of the committee, and at this time I'd like to introduce some of the members, or one of the members who's here, Senator Mike Gabbard. Hi, Mike. And we'll see who else shows up, but we have a full slate, so we're going to be joined probably remotely. During the pandemic and with a severe budget shortfall for the next several years, this committee will be seriously looking at ways to more cost-effectively serve the urgent needs of the public. A major area is the procurement of goods, services, and construction. And the objective of the procurement agencies is to ensure that the state does this fairly and impartially, timely, and cost-effectively to support government operations and services to the public. Bills to address some of these procurement concerns will be heard on Thursday at our hearing. The purpose of today's hearing, or briefing, is informational. It's to discuss the current procurement laws, policies, procedures, and staffing as they relate to cost-effective and timely procurement. Additionally, selected executive branch departments will share lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic and offer their recommendations to improve state procurement practices. Before proceeding with the department presentations, I'd like to make a few announcements. This informational briefing is being streamed live on YouTube, and a recording of the briefing will be archived on the Senate's YouTube channel. You can find links to viewing options for all Senate meetings on the live and on-demand video page of the legislature's website. In the unlikely event that we encounter major technical difficulties during the briefing and must end abruptly, the committee will post a public notice on the legislature's website if it schedules another briefing to discuss ending business. We have a full slate today, and I thank all the participating agencies. That said, we need to cover a lot of ground with a hard stop in 90 minutes. So agencies are asked to be brief and focus on procurement challenges and opportunities, so we will have time for questions and discussion. We'll first hear from the procurement support agencies, and that's the State Procurement Office, followed by Public Works Division of the State Department of Accounting and General Services, and the Administrative Hearings Officer of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs that hears the procurement disputes. I'd like to first call on Ms. Bonnie Kahakui, Acting Administrator of the State Procurement Office. Welcome, Bonnie, and thank you for being here today. Bonnie.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to brief you on the State Procurement Office, which is administratively attached to the Department of Accounting and General Services. I earlier provided a brief PowerPoint, which I hope you've had a chance to review. So I'd like to just summarize it. SBO is a relatively small office of only 20 people with a vast responsibility which touches every department and every agency across the state. Because of our size, all our purchasing specialists in purchasing, compliance, and e-procurement are cross-trained to support each other as the need arises. The SBO has dual responsibility. Not only do we represent the Chief Procurement Officer for the executive branch, but also Procurement Administrator for all jurisdictions. Not only do we procure statewide contracts, we provide guidance and assistance to all departments and jurisdictions regarding the statutes, the rules, policies, and procedures. Everything from choosing a method of procurement to evaluating criteria or answering simple questions. We get it all. The specialists also review all requests for alternative types of procurement, like exemptions and sole sources, restrictive, emergencies, contract extensions. We also develop and maintain several electronic applications that has made it easier for agencies to comply with the procurement statutes and rules. We have HYPRO, which is designed specifically for small purchases, but can be used for IFPs and RFPs. It automatically sends emails to vendors with opportunities with the state and responses online. We also have HANDS, the Hawai'i Awards Notices and Database System, to post solicitations and awards. It's a simple, standardized, making it easier for buyers and vendors alike. Agencies can also upload their exemption requests online without ever having to hand deliver paper documents. Our Hawaii Compliance Express, which was developed in 2004 and updated in 2020, is used to verify vendor compliance with IRS, DOTAX, DLIR, and DCCA, all online and real time. The Wizard is an online procurement manual available to anyone on the SBO website. The website has a host of information from statutes and rules, emergency, disaster, FEMA requirements, training opportunities. We have just a whole slew of information there. SBO provides training. We have about 50 classes currently, which will soon be on the DHERDS new learning management system, which is currently available 24/7. Our inventory section ensures the state's fixed assets are properly accounted for through the fixed asset and inventory system, which has been paperless since March of 2020. Our surplus makes available online all the state and federal listing for eligible recipients and hosts an online auction to the general public for forfeited airport items. Whenever there is a declared emergency, SBO is part of the DoD HAIMA logistics team to assist with procurement. In this latest pandemic, we were responsible for procuring about $170 million worth of PPEs and industrial hygiene. We are a full cycle operation from procuring, inventory, and surplus. Fortunately, through this pandemic, I think SPO was ahead of the curve. We already had electronic processes in place, so it was easier for us to transition to work remotely. But there are some challenges. The executive branch department is decentralized model, which means every department, every agency does their own procurement, except for those that use the SPO price or vendor lists. Each department has their own processes, has their own procedures, so there's no consistency across the state. One of the ways we can address this is with a new E-Procurement system, which is currently open solicitation. It's going to start with an e-marketplace, which buyers can buy from pre-solicited contracts. It'll be, like Sarah used to say, an economic Amazon site without all the fancy bells and whistles. Currently, we have two bills that we'd like your support on, SB 1035 and HB 881, which would authorize the State Procurement Office to have a special fund to fund the program and will help support the system. The funds will also allow us to build a new e-procurement system, which will standardize processes and eventually tie into the new financial system. The system will have built-in processes, conformity to procurement statutes and rules. Another challenge is the lack of a professional procurement workforce. There are 912 buyers in HYPRA alone, and probably 5 times that number that does procurement outside of the e-procurement system. Many of these people do procurements as other duties as assigned. They could be clerical staff, they could be engineers, they could be program managers, but they're not procurement specialists. We realize that procurements are not easy. It takes practice, it takes repetition. Employees can take training, but only may do it, once a year. By then, they probably have forgotten what the training was all about, or the laws have changed. One of the ways that could solve this is to create a procurement office or procurement section within each department. There would be a core of dedicated professional procurement specialists whose sole responsibility is to do procurements for their respective departments. One of the ways that we also can help our health and human services counterparts is a couple of bills that we also have in the works. The original bill is to propose the community council, but we're going to ask for amended language to increase the small purchase threshold from $25,000 to $100,000, which will be in line with the 103D threshold. And we'll also be asking to do, instead of a cost and pricing certification, for the department heads to determine price, fair, and reasonableness. Again, these are just some of the examples that we have brought forward, and we're certainly open to any suggestions that anyone else may have.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Questions? Senator Dela Cruz, Vice Chair Dela Cruz has joined us. Do you have any questions? Senator Gabbard? Senator Dela Cruz of Castile.
Okay, I guess I can.
So your e-procurement system sounds very good. Where are you in this process? Is that in play, or is it something in the offing, or is it a dream? Where are you in that system?
Yes, it was released early part of this year. We had our pre-proposal conference this morning, and so we are well on our way.
So what is a timeline for it to be actually operational that departments can use?
That's going to be a little bit further down the line. Because this is a self-funded model, we have to have the e-marketplace in line to generate revenue. Once we generate revenues and we're able to collect vendor collected fees, we'll use those fees then to implement the e-procurement modules. But currently, we have Hypro, and it is our current e-procurement system. It does have a lot of functionality, especially designed for the small purchases. The buyers can go on, they post their solicitation, they can do question and answers, they can do pre-proposal conferences, vendors can respond to them, but it's not integrated with the financial system or anything else. So it's kind of a halfway point to a full-blown e-procurement system, which will be the entire life cycle once it's up and operational.
So all the departments can now go on your system, the current system, and can purchase goods and services? Or
They
just
can do goods, services, and they can do small purchase construction. One of the drawbacks to doing full-blown construction is the size of the files that some of the construction solicitations have. But they can put it up. We just need to have an outside source where they need to store some of these large files. The capacity currently is at 100 megabytes per file, and I understand that some of these files are just gigantic and can't accommodate that. But they can certainly put the solicitation up. So they just would need to put the specs on an outsourced application.
So Bonnie, if that's the norm, or it happens more frequently than not, why not just build capacity so you can accommodate those size of files?
With the current capacity, with the current vendor, that is their capacity.
So what you're going to do about it? Because I think it's just not enough. You're going to have to have your current vendor either expand capacity, or maybe you need to get a new vendor.
Well, we have been trying to expand capacity, and we did actually take it from 10 to 100. So we have been expanding it a great deal.
Okay,
And
so
there is
what's
no limit. to the how many files you can put up. It's just that each file has a capacity of 100. And we did check around with other states and other databases, and most of them, they said in order to do some of the sizes that they're looking at, it would have the capacity, or the hardware, the software would have to be so gigantic, it would take up a whole room. So we're looking at different ways to see how to address those.
Okay, because if you're going to try to get to one system, there's going to have to be more consistency, and you're going to have to be able to accommodate everyone's files. So if that's the case, if you're saying that 100 is at your max, then maybe you should be relooking at what people have to post in the file, so that the amount of information is not as intensive.
That's certainly one way to look at it, and that's why we're hoping with the new E-Procurement system that they would have a more robust opportunity to have larger files, or whatever the construction people need to have. But that's certainly a consideration.
So are all departments using this e-system? So when you say you're meeting capacity, but is that also a problem if more departments or agencies come online to use your system?
Currently, we've only mandated that the HIPRO be used for small purchases, 15,000 to less than 100,000. But they can certainly use it for the larger, they can use it for IFBs, and they can use it for RFPs. They can do that right now. We've just not mandated them to do that. And it's not that they can't use it, they can certainly do so. So we would need to either mandate it to each department, or the departments would have to, we tell the departments, you'll need to do this. But the opportunity has been there for all these years.
So do you have a contract out for somebody to do this for you, or do you have somebody on your staff to do this? I'm just wondering what the consistency is to actually move this project to expand capacity is.
We do this contract, or this application is through NIC Hawaii, DBHIC. So that was through our portal contract. And so now with the new solicitation out, we haven't gone through any of we've not gone to that stage to determine who would be the new vendor and what their capacities would be.
But there's going to have to be a way to ensure compliance with all departments, and there has to be some incentives, I guess, for the departments to participate. If the departments are continuing to do all of it on their own without any assistance of your office, then maybe that's something that we need to look at as we look at eliminating certain divisions and certain departments. It's either all departments should be using it, and there has to be efficiencies and effectiveness in that system, or we don't use that and every department just does it on their own. But I don't think we should continue in this gray area. It's either we're gonna be consistent, have efficiency, making sure that all departments know what they're doing and they're trained through the infrastructure that you create, or we just dissolve your division and have everyone just do it on their own.
The intent is, when we have a new e-procurement system, the intent is to get everybody on board. That is the goal, is to have everybody use this system, the executive branch agencies.
By when?
That is,
Yep.
Yeah, so what's the timeline?
as I say, we don't have funds for this, so it's a self-funded model. So we have to have the e-procurement, the e-marketplace first to get the revenue to then implement the different modules. And we are going to start, once we do have the funds to do that, start with the Department of Transportation, Airports Division. They will be our model going forward.
But still, if the intent is that everybody should get on board, what is happening
No,
in terms
yeah.
of pushing that with all the other departments and making sure that they are going to come online?
So there could be a phased timeline. If you're saying airports is this year, then highways next year, then the rest of DAG's the following year, then health somewhere in between. UH should be on. What's your timeline for the entire state to get on there? It doesn't have to be all at once.
No, it's not going to be all at once because DOT has to be on there. We don't know. We hope to award this
No,
contract.
can you develop one? You need to develop one. I don't know is not a sufficient answer.
Well, because this is a self-funded model and we don't know how much revenue we'll be able to generate from this, will we then be able to say, going forward, how many modules we'll be able to implement?
Yeah, so you don't have any anticipated revenue costs? You're just going in there blindly?
We do have an anticipated, we do anticipate, based on our sales from our price lists, we do anticipate having some, but we have to first find out based on the solicitations and the offers, how much this is going to cost us. And then we're using
Yes.
the revenue.
So to some extent, it's a business plan. So based on on certain projections, you should come up with a timeline. So based on projections of costs, based on projections of revenue, you should be coming up with a timeline to get the entire state on board. And that doesn't mean that it's fixed.
We can certainly try that.
If you don't know how much it's going to cost, then you can't plan forward. So, even in terms of generating revenues, you will know what you need to do. But if you don't know
Estimated, at least estimated
estimate,
costs.
We
yeah.
estimate just if we had to buy a system, we estimated it to be between $6 and $7 million. So we need to generate a minimum of $6 to $7 million in the e-marketplace before we can start using any excess funds to implement the e-procurement system, that portion of that. But we can certainly forecast if we say generate that much money or what excess we have over a period of time, and then how many departments we can roll into that over the period of however long.
So has there been discussions with other departments as to the reduction of staff needed if we're all going to go on this system? Because the cost savings from that could also pay initially for some of the cost to stand up your system.
No, we haven't taken it that far. We've not contacted the other departments other than to say that we are looking at this. We brought this up probably a year or two ago. So we've made the departments aware of the intent to have a full cycle or full inclusive procurement system. So they have been aware of that.
Okay, if you guys can get estimated costs, estimated revenues, what would it mean for other departments to reduce their level of staffing? What would be the cost savings from that we could divert into the program, at least initially?
Yeah, so Bonnie, if you could put that together and submit it to us, that would be
Okay.
very helpful in moving this project forward. Because I also see in your budget that you lost a specialist. Is that person was supposed to work on this project, or is this project still moving along if you don't have staffing?
The project is still moving along, yes. We lost staff, it was defunded, but we're still moving forward.
Okay, so if you could get some kind of business plan, this is what it'll cost, this is what we could save if we had this kind of system in place, so that, you can't market it if you don't know what you're marketing. So if you can say, this is what it is, this is how it'll save you money and time in the departments, I think it's more palatable for departments to plan ahead and come on board.
I think it's difficult for departments because some of the departments do not have an actual procurement staff. So as I said earlier, a lot of the procurements are being done as other duties as assigned. So could we take less than FTEs, probably, but how much that is may be difficult to quantify, but we can try and get something together for you.
Yeah, and that is another problem area in terms of the staffing in the departments, and you know, we can come back to that, but I think, you know, your point of having the departments be able to work with their staff to get the most efficient way of procuring services, goods, and construction. But that said, you need to have the both combined. So working with the departments is really critical, I think, in terms of going out and at least talking to the departments as to what their needs are. I don't know if you've done that.
We've done that. We've contacted several of the departments, and we did start with the Department of Transportation, so they've been on board with this. But we've also tried to reach out to other departments to do a business process reengineering to get them ready for this.
Which other departments have you worked with?
I know that we've talked to Department of Human Services. I think we've talked to, you know, off and on Department of Health, maybe, just giving them an idea, okay, so when this new system comes on board, you need to have your processes and evaluate your processes now so that when this comes, it doesn't come as a shock to you that you may have to change all your processes.
Okay. Members, other questions?
Well, there was an article from January 5th, 2018 in Hawaii Business, and the title was Project Delays at Hawaii's Airport. And one of the things that Mark Dunkerley had said in the article is that each of these steps that should take months takes years, essentially, to get through. And so as part of the new e-commerce system, what would be a shortened timeline for a lot of these projects? So I think that would be beneficial for us and even the community and departments to realize is that as we hopefully move into what you're talking about, it's going to shorten the amount of time to get projects moving, especially now with the economy the way it is.
Oh, I agree. I don't recall that particular article in depth, but I do recall seeing how long it takes for projects to move forward. And it's not necessarily the procurement process that takes long. There are some departments that have multiple approval processes, check and double check and double check, and so they'll take, a month or 2 months.
Yeah, but is that even necessary though? Because it says here that in the article, the state's procurement process, which requires about 50 steps to complete a single construction project. That work involves getting approval from various state agencies like Departments of Budget and Finance, Accounting and General Services, Commerce and Consumer Affairs, plus the offices of the Attorney General and the Governor. Like, that's way too long. That's way too long. And we're taking, as Dunkerley says, months, and we're taking years instead of months. And so I'm not sure how yet if we can see a timeline for an existing project compared to a timeline under the new e-commerce system, because I think maybe then it might be worth investing in instead of you taking this approach of, well, let's see how much money we're going to get and we'll slowly grow it. We'll save money and get the economy moving much faster.
So let me just interject that Chris Kinimaka is going to do public works. They do goods and services, so we ask that question again of Chris. If Chris is on the line. Then
No, but it's not just, it says accounting, but it also says all these other state agencies. So, like I said, Budget and Finance, Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Attorney General. And so are those agencies all piped into the e-commerce so that it's going to be faster? We need it faster. Things shouldn't be happening simultaneously instead of sequentially.
Okay, those will not be inside the e-procurement system. The e-procurement system is for the procurement process itself. The only one that we hope to integrate with that is the AG's office, which approvals will be done. We plan to have standardized terms and conditions, and only if they want something special would it go outside of the e-procurement system for the AG to see. But the other things that you're mentioning, BNF, and the other permits would be outside of the system. The only other portion we're hoping to build is the funds available? Is the funds available?
But as
or
the
not?
procurement officer, are those processes necessary? Do we need those approvals? And can we change the system so that those approvals are not as arduous or time consuming? Because
I think Chris Kinimako with Public Works would have a better insight on if those other steps are necessary.
But, so let me just interject, Bonnie. But as the state's chief procurement officer, looking at the whole system of procurement and how is it that we have to have so many steps in that process is something that you, as a chief procurement officer, should be looking at. Even if it's construction or goods and services, what is that process and can it be streamlined so that the approvals are maybe looked at in terms of, is it the checkers checking the checkers, or is it important to safeguard safety or health or whatever? But it needs to be looked at. Have you looked at that, the whole process?
Yes, and we will. We will have an approval process, and we want to make sure that it's efficient so that you don't have 10 people in an approval process when only one or possibly 2 is necessary. So yes, that is.
No,
So
but
what
I
is
think
that?
we should have a review of some sort, like even an audit, to say what's the existing process and what should be the new process. I mean, there's an article from 2020, October 4th, from Procurious, and it says procurement needs less processes as they are slow, boring, and self-centered, which means a lot of the departments may think that they're very important and they need some approval, but really they don't. They're trying to justify themselves in having to have a say, and maybe they need one, but not as intensive. And so it just slows down the process. And so we need someone objectively looking at, is it really necessary to have some of these departments have the kind of input they have, or is it more, do they check the box to make sure that things are in accordance versus having more subjective reviews?
I agree.
So who's going to do that?
Well, with this procurement system, we're going to go through those processes and see where is it necessary. Does it need? Some of this is, outside of our purview. If Budget and Finance says they need to check, I'm not sure how we can.
But doesn't the statute give you a lot more authority than that, where you could tell Budget and Finance, no, I don't think that's appropriate?
I don't think so.
Well, but as the chief procurement officer, shouldn't you be proposing that these are the real standards you need, whether it's fairness or competition or whatever, but that's where you find that answer so they can streamline the process rather than just waiting on other agencies. And maybe that's a proposal that we would like to see going forward of what it should be, and looking at what it is and looking at how can we improve government services, make it more streamlined but more efficient. So
It's either going to be you, or we need a third party to arbitrate the department's determining if we actually need, at what level we need them, and if we need them.
Yeah, and if you're
Okay.
saying they're doing it at the department level, what are they doing at the department level? Because if it's taking a long time in the department level because they don't have the specialists.
No, but someone
what
should
is
just
it?
make the call. No, we don't need you, or this is the level we need you at, and move on.
Senator Kurt Otoguro, State Comptroller, if I may
Hi, good
add a
morning,
comment.
Comptroller.
Yeah, thank you very much. So with regard to what state procurement is doing with the e-procurement system, thanks to the legislature, we are also embarking on a financial management system upgrade, in which what you're talking about and what Senator De La Cruz is talking about will be part of a larger scale to look at business processes and the approval processes. So one such process that we are going to be taking a look at once we procure for the system in another month is in fact the appropriation system and the approval process as you're getting to. So there are different entities that are involved with budget and finance and DAGs and AG and even DCCA to some degree, and ultimately the governor. Each entity has its own review process for approval, as Senator is saying. Whether they're necessary or not in an automated fashion is what we want to find a solution for. And we have contracted with a third party to assist DAGs in looking at those business processes, as Senator De La Cruz said, an independent third party that has been involved in other projects like development of a uniform chart of accounts, which will require change. And so what you're asking is for us to embark on a change management business process project, which DAGs will lead and absolutely will involve SPO as it pertains to e-procurement. But what you're asking is a much larger question, which will be the responsibility of Department of Accounting and General Services.
So what is the timeline on that, Kurt?
We are out in RFP as like Bonnie, and we are bound to select, or the bids will be due on February 9th, and then we will review the process. We hope to engage the vendors and come down to selection by May or June, and get the project started. So by this the next biennium, we should be off and running. We have contracted with a third party. We just got to finalize funding for that third party to continue with the exercise to do this business process reengineering. And very much needed, as you pointed out.
So is that business process engineering going to include procurement? Because there's one thing of improving your business processes as a department or as DAGs overseeing the whole state, but the issue is how do we procure good service, especially public works, the construction, how do we do that more efficiently and without a lot of problems?
Right, there are many facets to that. As you said, what you were referring to is the financial side. So we can't enter into a contract without securing funds. And so in order to secure funds, you need all these different approvals. So budget and finance, once it's appropriated, the account gets established within the DAGs in the famous system. But that's all it does. And so to get the money allotted requires paperwork and review by the budget and finance analyst, who then has to take it to budget and finance for approval. And based on the availability of the funds necessary as a treasury function, they make a recommendation to the governor to release the funds. Governor has ultimate authority to do so. And in that process, we are also making sure that the contracts are correct, and that's where the attorney generals would get involved. And so, yeah, that process does take time, and that's part of the slowdown that we are absolutely going to be reviewing, and that starts the financial aspect of the procurement.
No, you can. It seems like I'm mixing it up, but Kurt, if you guys can look at the Boston Consulting Group's article, and I can send it to you from November 7, 2018. They said that typical procurement challenges gain a holistic view of procurement across departments, and I think that's what Bonnie mentioned. But what would be interesting for us is a side-by-side comparison of every department, and within every department, even a side-by-side comparison within every division to see how holistically, at least for you and maybe even the governor, how each division and each department is so vastly different, and to justify a lot of the things that Bonnie is saying. So I don't think that we actually have that holistic point of view captured anywhere.
Okay, good point.
And then we have to, but once we get that, then we can look at agile ways of working it, and how can we start to make each department and division slowly more consistent as time goes on. Hopefully, a timeline that's going to be catching up to some of the contracts that you guys are working on, so that they can work backwards. Because what I would hate to have is a lot of these this infrastructure available, but yet they're still working on an old system. So we have to figure out their timeline to get their department's procurement processes up and running the same time the infrastructure is up. There's another article from, where is this from? Government Technology, or GovTech. 11 ways to speed up procurement. Cooperative purchasing, I think that's what Bonnie's talking about. Strategic sourcing, I think she mentioned that too. Internal working groups. Buy solutions, not specs. Set standards early. There's 2 sets of rules, and I can go into that a little later. Build procurement muscle. Centralized contracting, which Bonnie's talking about. Leave it open in regards to RFPs and the timetables of those. Make e-procurement holistic. I think that's something that Bonnie's talking about. And centralized buying. And all of these things are good, but if we don't have all the departments adhering to them, then it's like it's not still producing the result that we want. So I'm not sure if we can see the timeline, then at least we can match the budget process with some of the things that we're talking about. So if there are procurement staff that maybe should no longer be there within the department, then that's something the legislature can do. Not necessarily I'm talking about Bonnie's shop, I'm talking about other department shop. If they're continuing to follow an old model and they have existing staff, then we can cut those positions, which hopefully would force the department now to follow the track that Bonnie's talking about. Because they should be all relying on Bonnie's shop so that there's a more centralized system.
So think about that, because because when you say create the market is the departments, and unless you get them on board, you really don't have the marketplace. So putting it in terms of what Vice Chair Dela Cruz is saying is really important, to start looking at that. And if in fact, Bonnie, you're saying that the departments don't have of those buyers or purchasing people that they have in their departments aren't really specialists in procurement, then we should look at that as well. And how many do we have? Have the numbers, but what do they do? And how can they help create the system and help the departments work faster in procuring? So the information is really important to get, whether you can get it from all the departments. I think as a chief procurement officer for the executive branch, you can definitely ask for that information.
Or maybe we can require that by a bill.
We would inquire we can do that. Okay, I'm going to move on because we have a really full slate, and we can ask more questions. So we can ask you more written questions. I think some of the questions that Senator Dela Cruz was asking really is pointed to Chris Kirimaka from DAG. So thank you, Bonnie, very much. We'll get back to you. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Chris Kirimaka is the Administrator for Public Works and handles all the procurement of construction for the executive branch. So Chris, you want to take over and answer some of the questions that Senator Dela Cruz asked about how we're doing construction procurement?
Aloha Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to participate with you today. Although I did have a presentation and I shared it with you all, I think it's a little off the page of where we are right now. Basically wanted to define what we do. And although the Public Works Division is a centralized service entity to provide procurement for the executive branch, the truth is construction procurement is really not centralized as much anymore. Yeah. So our clients are those agencies that don't have their own procurement arms, such as, the judiciary and libraries and Department of Agriculture, DBED, Department of Defense, and Department of Health and Human Services, where their mission is in providing the service, and we help them procure the facilities and service for the services that they provide. Short of that, we do have other major procurement entities in the executive branch, such as the Department of Transportation, the University of Hawaii, Department of Education, Hawaii Public Housing Authority, and then all the development authorities that do not typically come through DAGs. So with that in mind, we do service, we run roughly 200 projects at any given time of the year, targeted at about $300 million worth, which for agencies like DOT is not even one project. But we do that with 96 staff spread statewide. And just as a side note, we are operating at a 24% vacancy now, and we anticipate that becoming even larger as baby boomers like myself start to get to retirement age. That is going to be one of our crises.
You're an early Gen X. You're just an early Gen X.
We pretend we are, but I'm baby boomer. So, the challenges that we have, though, on the overall procurement schedule have more to do with building permits and the allotment of funds and bid protests, to where the actual approval process, while cumbersome, is only a fraction of the total time in the project. And so I think that's something we had shared before, and we'd be happy to go through in more detail as needed, or as invited to do so.
Can you go over that again? So it's the permits.
Yeah, permits is the biggest delay.
And protests?
Protests do delay our projects, and the allotment of funds. I think right now we understand why the delay will be there because of our economic challenges, but historically, as Comptroller was saying, that part of the approval process was cumbersome and is something that could use improvement in more typical times. So that's really the big schedule delay for us. The approvals that we've been going through, we've actually gotten better at it because of COVID-19 with electronic approval processes. We've learned a lot with our large projects that some of the missteps in approval or delays are because of lack of communication. So we've gotten a lot better at that, at making sure all the stakeholders are involved early on, even for such things as the counties, Department of Planning and Permitting, for example. We get them on board early, so zoning and permitting approvals can flow more quickly. Even state historic preservation, right? We meet with them quarterly now so that they know our projects are coming, and we don't get faced with the longer delays that we used to have just 5 years ago. So for us, again, it is really the permitting, which needs to be worked on. Approvals is just what we can clean up. I do agree that there's a difference in consistency across departments. If you recall Act 241, where the auditor did come through and say the agencies, as diverse as they are not following one system. And that's something that maybe we could get better at in how we communicate with the industry. But we're willing to partner with other agencies. We do recognize the other large procurement entities, however, are very unique in their requirements. They get federal funding, other types of grants. And so there are other steps that we cannot make it one size fits all. And I think that's going to be the challenge with any procurement system that tries to be standardized, because there is a level of uniqueness to the different projects and methods for procurement. So we're happy to participate in any kind of audit and assistance, and always with SPO on their procurement efforts as well.
So thank you, Chris. In the projects that you are working on with the departments, how does Public Works work with them so that you do the procurement right from the start to the end, so that you can prevent the kinds of hangs-up that projects have, or the delays they have? What are you doing with the departments? How does your staff work with them?
I'll start with, it's a continuous learning spiral. We can always get better, but even in the last year and a half, I think we've gotten much better. Excuse me. What we do is our planning branch, works very closely with the departments even before projects come to fruition. We're helping them build their master plans for how they want to utilize their facilities, and helping them determine how they want to sequence them for funding, planning, and programming to meet their needs. And then when we go through the whole funding process, we'll kick off projects early with them and try to do our best to understand their programs. We're also becoming a lot more strict in how we guide them to stay focused on what their essential needs are. And because a lot of times you'll see agencies that chase after several balls, for example, they all roll off the table. We try to guide them to prioritizing them. It might not be the order they initially wanted, but it's the order that fits at the time for budgeting, for scheduling, and capacity of the industry at the time. So a lot more transparent communication. We've gotten better within our own division as we move through our project processes to be able to hold hands and make sure for the client we're one agency. We are also building a lot
Part of it is though because of the comptroller, but the fact that there is new leadership within public works. So I think a lot of this is because of the new leadership, which I think we're all extremely thankful for. But going back to I don't want to focus necessarily on the things that are working because I think that's positive, and I want to reiterate that and thank you for them. But what I think we got to focus is the three things that you talked about, the fact that there have permitting delays, and what can we do to help with that. The allotment of funding sounds like the comptroller is working on that, and if is there something that the legislature can do to help with that? I don't know if you need time to think about that, and then the third part of protests.
Yes.
What can we do to help with legislation, amendments to bills to help expedite some of that?
I think what you'll see is in some of our testimony that some of the mandated, what would you call them, adjustments to the bids to give preferences, we're actually asking to remove when they're no longer effective. Things such as the apprenticeship program or Hawaii products for construction, primarily not because they were bad, the intent was good, but in the case of Hawaii products, for example, it's already outlived its usefulness. The program is successful without the additional consideration or advantage given to people who use Hawaii products because most contractors already use them. Things like the apprenticeship program where procurement might not be the place to push apprenticeship, but these types of advantages that are granted end up really bogging us down in protest because different contractors will start to challenge each other on whether they qualify for that benefit, for that advantage. And it's sad because we have a lot of big projects that just sit and they can take 6 months to a year to resolve over something as small as whether you qualified for an apprenticeship program. Programs that give benefits, for example, that say if you have a particular program, you can actually cost 5% more than the low bidder and be awarded the job. On a small project, that's nothing. But if you have a $100 million project, you're talking millions of dollars. We've had that as well.
Well, and then you could jeopardize the project because the costs are going to go up and then it's no longer feasible.
So Chris, would you have some language to clarify that? What is a qualified bidder? I guess that so that you don't have so many protests on that end of it, so that it's clearer, so that you can prevent this from the start, And
Do you have a bill? Is there a bill out there already that we need to look at or make amendments to, or?
We can put it in a bill if you have some language.
There are 2 administrative bills right now out that we seek to remove the apprenticeship program and the Hawaii products program from the procurement benefit or procurement credit, or what you call it.
Can we look it up?
So that would help streamline our efforts.
You have some bill, we can talk offline if you can give us the bills that you have that will help in this process. That would be very good.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll channel that to you then. Thank you.
I have had, just kind of switching gears a little bit, I've heard that sometimes the lowest bid has been accepted and that becomes costlier because of a lot of change orders in between. Is there any effort that you're making to help the departments on a cradle to grave kind of project so that your engineers will follow this project from start to finish? And there's a way then to keep it on track instead of having all the problems that come up in the processing of the big contracts.
Where we found repetitive change orders coming up happens in For example, building permit review. One big one that we kept hitting in the last couple of years was fire department requirements, where it's not really clear in the code, and the fire departments have some jurisdiction in what they require. And then after the project goes out, the fire department will come out and say, wow, you completely missed a system, and that, again, becomes a wrench in the project. So what we did is we started meeting with the counties and their fire departments. We have hired a consultant to go through
See, she's
and talk
reformed
to
a lot
them,
of that.
identify exactly what standards they use and what our teams need to look at. So we create those kinds of checklists and agreements with regulatory agencies to help guide us through.
So
No,
is that
but-
your staff doing it, or is it a
Yeah.
consultant doing it? Who is
It- oh,
watching
sorry,
over the
it-
project?
Yes, sorry, we have a technical services office that does our standard design criteria manuals, but they are hiring consultants to meet with these regulatory agencies to lay out the requirements. And when that happens, we then train our staff, and we've done that with, for example, historic preservation requirements, the fire department. I think we went through even on the permitting process for Honolulu for our staff.
Okay, I guess there's two different concerns, like, sounds like, or I wouldn't necessarily concerns. The chair's priority is to look at the overseeing of the project as it moves along. I guess what I was more interested in, what you brought up, was the fact that you're now taking a step which hasn't been done before, in meeting with the counties, and not just DPP, but the counties, fire department, environmental services, to make sure that what they're going to require is in your early planning, so that you're not so far along where you have specs, prices, you're starting construction, and then now the counties after the fact are going to say, well, you forgot to put this in, that in, sidewalk in, all that. So I think that's awesome that you were able to do that without any kind of legislation or rule change. That's just pure leadership and being more proactive. So I appreciate that. And so what the chair's concern sounds like is, once that's all completed, now that you've done that work, the contract has been awarded, it sounds like the chair would like to know, is that your department now that oversees the construction, or is that your department who contracts out overseeing the construction? Is that correct?
Yes, we actually do both. So for our clients, when the project is within our capacity, we will do the construction management ourselves. When we have large specialized projects like the Hawaii State Hospital or the Veterans Home, or even judiciary projects that are very specialized, we'll start to hire some CM firms with that specialty. We're seeing now, though, with the challenge that we have with people leaving and our inability to fill positions, that we are hiring more consultants to do CM services, especially for our district offices, because we just don't have the manpower to administer projects firsthand. But,
Okay, so it sounds like normally you do have a fine line then. It sounds like that when your department is going to oversee it, and when you have to actually outsource it, and it just depends on it depends on the situation, where if you have enough staff, or if it's specialized work.
Exactly, that's correct.
So how many engineers do you have, Chris, to oversee these projects? What do you have on board? You say you had some that you got lost, but how many do you have now?
I'm engineer specific. I can tell you how many I don't have. I have 10 vacancies.
No, how many do you have?
In our division, we have 88 people.
88
88 total.
Not
Most of
engineers,
them-
though. That's,
engineers?
no, she
No,
has.
how many
It's fewer
engineers
than that.
oversee? How many?
Engineers and architects.
What was that?
It's engineers and architects, total 88.
Well, and support staff. So that would be like our clerical staff.
Yeah, admin.
I can get you the specific number of technical staff.
Maybe we'll follow up with written questions, but anything
Yeah.
else? Because we have a protest hearings officer also, so we can ask him questions. It's a third person. And then I have the department, but I don't think we can get to that.
Well, I mean, I would be interested, not necessarily, how do we, going back to the three things that she mentioned, what can we do to streamline the permits? sounds like the comptroller and the public works administrator is already looking at how they can get allotment of funds streamlined. And if they need our help, then they'll let us know, sounds like. On the third component, it's the bid protests. And if we can clean up some of the specialized requirements or specialized bidding adjustments, then that might help with some of the protests. So if maybe the protest officer can just either confirm that or add to that.
Okay, so we're gonna move on. Okay, thank you, Bonnie.
Chris.
Chris. Thank you, Chris. Okay, moving on, talking about bid protests, I'm going to move on to Craig Uehara from DCCA. He's the senior hearings officer for the Office of Administrative Hearings. Is Craig on? Craig?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Can you put your video on
I see.
so we can see you as well?
Yeah.
We can hear you though.
Sounds like he has a technical
Start the
difficulty.
video. It keeps getting a message. The host has.
Oh,
Here
maybe.
we go.
Can he let you in?
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there. Okay. Hi,
Okay.
Craig. Thank you for joining us. You heard some of the discussion, the concerns about bid protests and how long it takes. Maybe you could just give us an overview of the protests.
Yeah, let me, yes, and first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this very important discussion. Our office, the Office of Administrative Hearings, is part of the DCCA, as you all know. And maybe, let me just give you a brief background on my office's involvement in the procurement protest process. So back in 1994, my office was charged with conducting all of the administrative review hearings to review protest denials. And this is from all agencies of the state, the 4 counties, as well as the UH. And so from the very start, back in the 90s, we were well aware that government projects could not begin because there's an automatic stay in place when somebody protests. So we are well aware of that, and so those cases took the highest priority in our cases, even to the extent of rescheduling other cases that we're responsible for to make sure that the case was resolved expeditiously and so the job could be commenced. Since then, though, there's been an effort through the legislature to kind of streamline or expedite the process even more. And so for our office, the code was amended to add, over the years, 3 more requirements. The first one was that we complete the hearing, which is oftentimes challenging because it oftentimes involves complex issues and it's very litigious. There's large stakes involved. But we have to complete it within 45 days from beginning to end. The other requirement to try and streamline and expedite this process, as far as our office is concerned, is to require that protest before you have the right to appeal a denial to my office reaches a minimum jurisdictional amount. So for instance, if the general contract is over $1 million, then the protest has to involve at least 10% of that amount. And sometimes it cannot reach that amount, they don't get the right to appeal, so that cuts that out. And then the third one that was added over the years was that the protesters are required to post a protest bond. Subject to forfeiture, if the protester does not prevail. And I can tell you that that has made a significant difference. I think that was back in 2002, and I'll mention that a little later on, but it has made a difference in reducing the number of appeals that we've seen prior to that. With respect to the 45-day deadline, because the code requires us to conduct a hearing and issue our decision within 45 days, which, as I mentioned, can be challenging, most cases, again, continue to take the highest priority in our office. In fact, our policy has always been, with respect to those 45 days, that period of time is not subject to extension, even if the parties request an extension or agree to it. it's 45 days, after which we lose our jurisdiction. And so when we receive these appeals, they are immediately assigned to one of our hearings officers, and the parties are expected to be ready to try the case within a few days' notice in order to make that 45 days. And of course, part of that 45 days has to be carved and put aside so the hearings officer can prepare a thorough and complete decision so that hopefully it stands in an appeal. So in that regard, what we do and what we have done over the years is once the hearing officer is assigned, they meet with the parties almost immediately to determine, first of all, if the matter can be resolved quickly. Sometimes all it takes is a discussion between the parties. They never really had the opportunity to talk face to face, civilly, and clarify some issues. And if we have a little luck involved, they can resolve it, and it ends there. If it cannot be resolved, then we try and discuss with the parties the possibility of addressing the dispute by motions. And so when we do these cases by motions, then it basically obviates the need for a long, time-consuming, protracted hearing. And that hopefully short-circuits the end result as well. And even in this period of social distancing and pandemic, nothing for us has really changed. We are still obligated to meet that 45 days. The change that we have made, and it's kind of pushed us forward, quite frankly, is that we now allow these cases to be filed electronically. Prior to the pandemic back in March, I think, maybe 5% of our cases was filed electronically. So I would say now, or since our offices started to be closed and so forth, and upwards of 95% of our cases are filed electronically, and it's been a welcome change by almost all of the parties that come before us. It's more convenient, of course, it's safer. In addition to that, last year all of our hearings officers underwent training to do remote hearings through Zoom, Teams, and the like. Sometimes the parties do not have the technology, so of course we do it by telephone. I think it's also worth mentioning that when our decisions are appealed and the appeal would go to the circuit court level, then the code also requires them to expedite it. In their case, they have 30 days to render a decision. If they fail to do that, they lose jurisdiction, and the last decision made in the process reverts back to the last decision made, which probably be ours. One word about the protest bond. As I mentioned earlier, it has made a significant difference since it was put in place, I think, back in 2002. I think I want to say prior to the bond requirement, we were faced with maybe 20 to 30 appeals a year, roughly. And now, or since the bond was put in place, it's cut it down tremendously. I want to say now we average maybe 10 to 12 a year. The other thing I think I worth mentioning in this discussion is all of our decisions are made available to the public. In addition, all of our decisions are summarized and placed in what we refer to as the Hawai'i Procurement Handbook, which is prepared by my office and updated regularly. We post it on our website, and we make it available to the public in that fashion. The posting of these decisions, according to a number of procurement officials that I have had the pleasure of talking to over the years, has, I think, helped them write more effective specifications, prevented protests in certain cases, expedited the resolution of some protests by simply educating the parties, their attorneys, the general public on the requirements of the code, and then our interpretation, hopefully consistent interpretation of those requirements. So that kind of gives you a good view of our kind of narrow involvement in the procurement process. The subject, we're on the clock. We're 45 days, and we have never strayed from that. In my experience, the courts have never strayed from that either. So my suggestions, and I've seen cases where there have been delays, and again, I'm not privy to what's going on before the case reaches my office, but I am aware of cases over the years where I've seen delays between bid opening, bid submission, bid opening, and then the procuring agency's decision on what to do with the bid, whether to reject it, which may oftentimes generate a protest, and award the contract. I've seen delays in that phase. I've also seen delays in the next phase, which is when a protest is lodged, the denial comes much, much later. And again, to be fair, I'm not privy to the reasons for that, but I just wanted to point that out. Maybe that's something the committee can look at as far as bringing everybody in line. The court is on the clock, 30-day clock. Our office is on the 45-day clock. Even the protesters, under the code, have 5 days to protest. If they miss that one, and many do because they're not aware of all the intricacies of the code and they're out of luck. And then they have 7 days to protest to my office. If they miss that, the case is dismissed. So, in terms of the procuring agency,
Greg, do you think you can send us that in writing, though? I think that's important what you just said.
I do.
Because then maybe we can codify the timeline that you're suggesting and
Yes.
add to it, because that creates a lot of predictability.
I think so.
So, and Craig, in terms of the time, 45 days, you've been able to make that every time, right? So do you think that that's a good time frame for the departments as well, so that they can?
Well, they'll
stop,
testify.
you know?
So if we can get what he's saying and put it in an amendment, they'll testify on it, and we can post the amendment so that the departments can testify. But if we add what he's saying, in addition to what the comptroller and the public works administrator is saying, and cleaning up some of the specialty requirements in the bids, I think a combination of both would help.
I did see, just for your edification, I did see such a bill. I think it's Senate Bill 1329. It might speak to that. You might want to take a look at that, but I don't want to overstep that. But that seemed to
Is that the one with
address
timelines?
it's
Some
part of the time limit for your
time
on.
limits,
No, that's good. And
and you can add that in.
yeah, so if we take his suggestions, and then we take some of the suggestions from the comptroller and the public works administrator on what needs to be, some of the specialty items in the, or requirements in the bids, and streamline both, then that may help.
Okay, if you could send that to us, Craig, your language or your suggestion, then what we're looking at is that bill that you're talking about,
Or
1329, we could use that.
Or maybe possible amendments to that bill.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
because I'm
hearing on
looking
a
at Senate Bill-
Thursday, so if you can send it to us or testify,
No. Yeah, if you can include your amendments as part of your testimony on that bill.
it would be really helpful to have your testimony on that.
On 1329.
Yes.
Okay, let me take a look. I had it, I just kind of glanced over it, but it seemed to address that. So, okay, I'll take a look at it.
Because it addresses the lower level before it gets to you, and that's where the delays are, yeah.
That's the time I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you so much, Craig. Really appreciate what you're doing and your input.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. So for the departments, I have to apologize because we know that you have some good examples that you were going to share with us in terms of recommendations for how we can streamline or improve the procurement practices based on what you've experienced during the pandemic. So I'm going to give you all 5 minutes to rush in and tell us some good ideas. If you don't get a chance or what you agree with.
So some of the suggestions from Craig and from the comptroller, if you agree with them, then or if you have additional.
If you have additional suggestions on what you learned in terms of this expedited procurement that you've been through, then I'm gonna just call on you in like 5 minutes, but if you have written, send it in to us because we're gonna run out of time. So I'm so sorry, but, this was very good conversation with everybody. I hope you all learned from it as well. So I'm gonna call on Department of Health, Kathy Ross, Deputy Director Ross. Can you, 5 minutes? Sorry.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair. Is my sound okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Kathy Ross, Director of Department of Health. You know, I instead of adding on to some systemic changes that the Comptroller and SPO and DAGS has already mentioned, I'd like to just share some of the good things that have happened with the procurement exemption that's in existence now. The current procurement exemption, because of the pandemic, has allowed us to be much more flexible in responding to COVID-19 needs. We've been presented the need to procure goods and services that we normally wouldn't procure. Some of those examples are PPE and industrial hygiene, which you're very familiar with. Test kits that are not just for a state lab, but for use in the community and the services that go with them. Isolation and quarantine sites, which are often hotels and banks of rooms in hotels for isolation and quarantine. Mobile vaccination teams, again, we used to rely on the Medical Reserve Corps and our internal staff to do stop flu at school type of vaccine administration, but we've had to get a lot more partners to help us now. We've been able to get temporary support staff through some of the staffing agencies much more quickly. And also, you know, through the partnership with DAGS and some of the other sister agencies, we've been able to get facility rentals that don't necessarily fall into the scope of DAG's leasing branch, but we've been able to obtain long-term rentals such as the convention center with their support. So, you know, again, just to reiterate, this exemption that we are we're allowed to utilize, it's allowed us to get these things that we know are critical to responding to COVID, but if it didn't exist, it would be nearly impossible to have purchased the kinds of things that I mentioned.
So were you using the E-Procurement System, or what was the process, or how is it different from how it was before on being able to procure quickly? What was the element that was there that helped you?
One of the main elements was the need to get certain kinds of quotes or to do formal RFIs, RFPs, and RFQs. Those, you know, it takes staff time to be able to write those up and then also to go through the process of opening it up for bid, getting the bids, and like what Dags mentioned about protest. So if somebody didn't agree with who we awarded the bid to, they would be able to protest, which would stall the execution of those contracts and beginning of those services. So one of those things, again, we did it judiciously. We made sure we got quotes from people in a more informal way, where we got verbal quotes, or we did a market analysis before we were able to secure certain things, but we didn't have to go through, I think like you both said, like that linear process of trying to secure certain approvals.
But Kathy, I think we're gonna have to codify some of the things you're talking about, because right now you're in a time where you have some of these exemptions, and
emergency proclamation, but
that's what we have to reconcile, is so that what you're talking about, how do we make it so that they become the norm in most circumstances? I understand that certain things are gonna need, it may not fall into that, but.
Yes, no, absolutely. We 100% support that. One thing that was really, really important was the partnership and the open communication with not just our Deputy Attorney Generals, but with SPO, with DAGS, with Budget and Finance. We've had a lot more regular communication when things were coming up and problem solving on the fly. And again, that procurement exemption allowed us to be able to do these things. I think a lot of times rules and processes are put into place because one or two people might have done something inappropriate in the past. And then so to prevent things from happening, right, rule after rule after rule gets created until we have this system that is difficult to recognize.
Yeah.
So absolutely we support being able to work with our sister agencies to make procurement much more streamlined.
So thank you, Kathy. If you have something written, like you can put it together for us, of what is that, those elements,
Or
and we can forward that.
Or your testimony on Thursday's bills, if you can capture some of the thoughts
Yeah.
that you
So we have
just
some
reiterated.
procurement bills. If you can find a way to put it in those bills, then we can amend the bill to include some of these things. That really will expedite if it's, having kind of the working way of expediting, but still doing it fairly and, meeting the standards. That would be helpful. Thank you. I'm going to call on, thank you, Kathy. I'm going to move on. Thank you. To DHS, is Kathy Betts on?
Our deputy.
Oh, deputy.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, and
Oh,
members of the
Jeremy.
committee.
Joseph. Okay, thank you, Joseph.
Joseph Campos, Deputy Director, Department of Human Services. I just wanted to preface, we do have 3 short slides just to help provide some examples of the aspects that we thought were beneficial. So if I can share my screen, and as I'm doing that, I would just like to iterate and stress what, sorry, bear with me. Here we go. Iterate what Deputy Director Ross had mentioned about what were some of the benefits to the exemptions that were created for us, especially within Act 9. So primarily what happened was, as we pivoted to telework and create, services that would help our departments and our residents of Hawaii, access the benefits that they could obtain through DHS, we had to really enhance our IT infrastructure. And we utilized the cooperative purchasing agreements that are available. And some of the main benefits of that is that they are agreements that are entered into at a national level with various states, which increases our buying power or our purchasing power. In addition to cooperative purchasing agreements, there was the CARES funding that came through, which developed or which supported some of our childcare facilities. And on the childcare facility side, we did have some challenges as well as strengths. Primarily, some of the challenges was the short timeline that we had to implement the new program. Some of the childcare facilities were not used to or accustomed to applying for grants and did not have the back of the house facilities or infrastructure to help them through the process. However, some of the strengths were the strong partnership with the Hawaii Community Foundation and the flexibility in really, responding to the needs of the childcare facilities and the distribution of the CARES funding. And finally, we were able to create online applications because of the leadership and vision that the legislature had in putting in some of the exceptions in Act 9 from 2020. And with that, we were able to engage and enhance some of our pre-existing contracts, and we created an online application for the SNAP and financial assistance programs, in which we had over 100,000 people or applicants through the online application site. So really it was the benefit of the exemptions that were implemented, as well as the ability to move quickly and be flexible. So as I said, we really just support everything that was already stated with the previous speakers.
Thank you. So that the procurement process was in terms of getting the contracts for your IT system in order to move quickly. And how long did that take? Just in terms of time.
It took, after we got the approvals, with the expenditures of the CARES funding, the CRF funding, I believe we were able to implement all of the contracts within 6 to 8 week period.
Wow.
Yeah. Deputy Director, I would think that based on the bills that we're hearing on Thursday, if you can also send in your testimony with language changes so that some of the processes that you get to in practice now can be codified, so that when we're out beyond this pandemic, if they make sense for better government, we want to make sure that that our current laws are amended so that you can
Ongoing.
continue to do so.
Will do. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, we have
Jade.
Jade Boutte
Yeah.
from Director from Department of Transportation. Jade, are you presenting, or Sandra Inoue, or?
Yeah, I'll introduce her. Senator, thank you and good afternoon. Chair Moriwaki, Vice Chair, and committee members. DOT is a procurement machine, and we buy all types of goods, services, and we have a lot of CIP projects. So DOT can be the driver of our economic engine and help boost the economy during these dire times. So let me turn over to Sandy Inoue of our contracts office. She's our go-to person for procurement at DOT. So I'd like to turn over to her so she can share lessons learned during the pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you, Jade. Sandy, are you on? Oh, hi, aloha.
Aloha, Chair and Vice Chair. So I'm going to share one lesson that was very instrumental, I think, that we feel is very sustainable. And that is the electronic bidding. I think the electronic bidding provided us a means of reaching across the state, where we used to receive physical bids at the various districts across the islands. We use HiPro, which we feel was very successful and continues to be as our electronic bidding tool. The fact that it's already vetted and endorsed by SPO, it's got a support infrastructure in place, readily available to service both state and public users. Minimal limitations, we are using it for goods, services, and construction, and it partners well with those processes that we still have not transitioned fully to electronic, such as our conventional contracting process. So there has not been a major challenge with that. Furthering to the electronic bidding process is the creation of the virtual environment, where we still do public bid openings. We hold them now in our lobby to ensure the social distancing, but we also give bidders the option of attending virtually so that we limit the physical attendance. We still do get bidders that show up in person, but they now have an option. And lastly, I think it just further supports the expediting the process through electronic paperless means. And so we've been able to disperse documents a lot faster through email, and just allow that option to being physically present, or bidders having to drop off bids at the contracts office.
So the bids come in by all the bidders. They accept that it's electronic. No one's protesting that they can't submit paper bids or.
So for those procurements that are set up through HiPro, yes, it is all done within the system. And then for those procurements that are done still the conventional way, then we will still do the opening, and then we will have it available virtually for attendance.
You still accept those, the conventional
Yes.
way?
Yes.
More questions?
I just wanted to ask, the electronic bidding, so that's a normal process now. That's not an exception to the rule because of COVID.
Yes, we have highways, I think, has been the most robust, where all their procurements are done through HiPro, and air and harbors has introduced, depending on the nature of the procurement, but they are starting to transition.
Okay,
And
so
yes,
if
it is sustainable.
Okay, so if the legislature now required all departments to go through electronic bidding, and you would have, maybe we could come up with something where the director, under certain circumstances, could go back to the more traditional or paper route to help transition people more to electronic bidding. That's something that you think would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So DOT is using this ongoing past the pandemic, so this becomes a way of doing
Yeah.
business now, right?
Yes.
No, but the problem is though that we're allowing both.
Yeah, but at
So
some
if
point,
we can codify it or change statute to only allow electronic bidding, and in certain, we still need to allow for certain circumstances just in case.
Effective date like a year later or something like that.
Yeah.
right?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I want to thank you all. We actually are only 2 minutes off. I want to thank all the presenters. It's been really educational. We've learned a lot. We are going to have a hearing on procurement. There are a number of bills, as mentioned. So if you can look at those bills, and some of these good ideas can be inserted into the bills. If you have any other suggestions or comments, we will also be asking you to follow up on some written questions we have that came out of this hearing, but we will certainly look at ways in which we can move forward with a better procurement practices and see what we can do to make the state much more efficient and effective in serving the public. So mahalo, everyone. There being no further business, this informational briefing is adjourned. Thank you.